So then an obvious question is, does the narcissist become successful, or does success build the narcissist?
Yeah.
Why is it that so many successful people seem to be narcissists? In this conversation, I speak with Mitja, who's a University of Münster professor of psychology and one of the world's leading experts on the topic of narcissism. We discuss narcissism as a personality trait that's associated with confidence and energy and a well-developed sense of the attention economy. Mitja explains how these traits really can have an impressive impact in the world, but they can also lead to friction and the breakdown of personal relationships. I'm Shane Farnsworth, and this is the Escape Sapiens podcast, supported by the Andrea Font Brown Foundation. If you enjoy these conversations, you can help support them by liking, subscribing, and sharing. And now, here's Mitja back. I hope you enjoy.
Escape Sapiens.
Why is it that people have personality at all? It's one of the things that fascinates me about intelligence, right? I imagine we could have intelligence with no personality at all. We're all the same. Is there some evolutionary advantage, or is it inevitable?
Yeah, that's a really interesting and very basic question. And often personality psychologists do not think about this question at all because personality is just there. And I think it's kind of both. It's inevitable because we have genetic variation that is just there. And at the same time, there is not one optimal level in any personality trait. So because one argument could be, okay, there's evolution, there should be an optimal way of doing things, and why do people differ, right? And I think there are so many niches and different advantages and disadvantages that come along with your personal strategy in life that differences evolve, and different kinds of personalities have advantages and disadvantages.
But so we're thinking at the moment about building general AIs, right? We're looking at AI these days.
Yes.
Do you think ultimately we'll end up with AIs that all have their own personalities, or?
Definitely, I think that will be the case. Actually, people are working on this, so they are working on rebuilding personality via AIs. Right now, we are doing a project where we try to rebuild AIs that tell stories that sound like a story from an extrovert or an introvert, for example. And I think this is something that is already going on and that will be created, because it also feels more natural, right? That people differ, and it will feel more natural that machines differ.
But they're intentionally building it into the machine, right?
Yes, but in a way the variation is there. So the variation in, for example, language these machines grasp on is there. And there are systematics to this variation, and this is what we see in personality. And because people differ, this variation is observable. And in a way, the machines will grasp on this variation in any case.
From the training set.
Yes.
So you focus primarily on narcissism, or that's one of your big topics. Yeah. Why did you start there? What was the draw for you?
So I think there are different reasons. One is that narcissism is so intimately connected with social relationships. And I'm really interested in how personality affects our social relationships and how it develops because we are in certain relationships and make certain social experiences. And narcissism is very interesting in this respect because it has a lot of effects on social relationships, how they evolve, how they are maintained, friendships, romantic relationships in the job. And at the same time, the narcissistic self is so strongly connected to how others react. And so this combination is very fascinating. I think this is one point. And the other point is that I just observe a lot of attitudes, opinions about narcissism in the public. And it's fascinating that these opinions are so loosely connected to what we see in the science of narcissism. So there's also this reason to check, can we translate the science better into the public opinion?
What do you mean by that? Do you mean that when someone is pointed out in the media as being a narcissist, it doesn't necessarily align with the clinical or the research definition?
This is one point, but I think that the main point is that what narcissism is in the first place is often misunderstood. So what we have in the public opinion is this idea of narcissism as a disorder, mainly a disorder. And there are different variants of this opinion. So either narcissists are traumatized and very weak deep down inside, and they compensate for this. So this is one idea. Or the other idea is that it's part of a dark personality, that people that are narcissists want to manipulate others, for example. And these ideas do not align very well with the science.
Okay, so then maybe that's the best place to start. What is narcissism, and how would I notice it in someone if I was to see them on the street?
Yeah. So I think the first important point is that narcissism is a personality trait, a dimensional personality trait. So it's not that you have it or doesn't have it, but you have a certain score on narcissism. In a similar way, you have a certain score on intelligence, or that you have a certain height, for example. So you cannot say narcissism is nothing that affects me because you have a certain narcissism score. And it's very widely distributed in the population. So I think this is the first important point. And then there are certain ingredients. So, and there are, I think, three main ingredients. So the first one is grandiosity. People think that they are special, that they will build great things in the future. So like Muhammad Ali said, I am the greatest. Mm-hmm. Or there's a nice saying from Dali, I don't have the original quote exactly, but he says, I experience the greatest joy in life every morning being Salvador Dali, right? So these grandiose ideas. The second is entitlement. So people, and it's very closely connected to this grandiose idea, because I am grandiose, I am entitled to special treatment, to special experiences. And the third one, very important one, is strive for social attention and status. And again, this is closely connected to the grandiosity and entitlement ideas, because by having a high status, you express your grandiosity, you show your grandiosity, and you are also entitled to this higher status. This is something science just focused on recently, that this strive for status might be a key motivational driver of narcissism.
But is it also delusional? I mean, we see many powerful people, many celebrities, people in charge, who appear to have narcissistic traits. So are they delusional, or is it that narcissists do in fact they're more intelligent, they're more beautiful, they have some characteristic that's real there that underpins their beliefs?
So narcissism, as any other trait, comes along with a couple of further traits. So narcissism is related to a couple of typical behaviors, and of course we can talk about that. But of course, it can be related to a bunch of different characteristics. So there are dumb and intelligent narcissists. There are very attractive and unattractive narcissists. There are more or less socially fluent narcissists. So, and this is something that's very important to consider, that there are all these differences within the large group of narcissists. And this is also important because this can have a large effect on how well the narcissistic strategy plays out in life.
Mm-hmm. It seems like a short-term strategy, right? From what I've read from your own work, narcissists, they score positively on if you line narcissists up along a line and ask people, do you like them? Given an introduction, people tend to like narcissists better.
Yes.
In the short term.
Yes.
Is this the case?
Not if they're asked for it. So if I would ask you, how much do you like a narcissist? The answer would be clear. No, I don't like narcissists. They're arrogant. I wouldn't want to get to know a narcissist. This is what people say, because this is our ideas about this trait. But when people actually meet narcissists, they like them more, right? And this has reasons, because they tend to look better.
Is that, sorry to interrupt you, that's because they look after themselves more?
Yes.
Because they want to present a certain image?
So there's some research showing this, so that they put more energy into their appearance. There are also other ideas that maybe narcissism develops because people are more attractive, which is an interesting idea, but there's few research on that. There can also be joint genetic reasons, of course. But we know that narcissists have a closer look on their appearance. So this is one major driver behind this. They also act more self-confident, which is a major part. They show more charm, humorous statements, and these behaviors, they are likable at first sight. We like it when people break the ice and create a situation in which we can get to know each other. They seem interesting. At zero acquaintance, short-term acquaintance, people want to get to know narcissists better.
So how does it relate then to, say, sociopathy or other, I'm not going to call it a disorder, but other areas of personality? Is it that are they able to better empathize and take advantage of people in the short term, or do they lack empathy? How does it play out?
Yeah, they're both ideas, right? So the idea that they lack empathy, they don't know what is going on in others' minds, and therefore they act egoistically. But there's also the idea of this strategic manipulation, right? They know better, even better than others, what's going on, and they use this for their advantage. I think it's none of this. So what we see when we look at several tests of empathic accuracy, social accuracy, we see there's almost no difference between people scoring high or low in narcissism. A small difference that narcissists perhaps score a little bit lower in something like empathic accuracy, but this might also be motivational, right? And with regard to the motivation, we can say for sure that narcissists have fewer interest in the motives, desires, and emotions of others. But this is not because they are not able to feel emotions or are not able to understand others, but they have other things to do.
I see.
Right?
Then this might be a little bit out of left field, but people who are drunk or people who are high on cocaine, they seem to have narcissistic traits, whereas people say that taking mushrooms will dissolve the ego, let's say. So there's a few related questions, but can you see, for example, in a brain scan that this person is a narcissist, or what is the link there between these behaviors when someone is on something?
Very difficult, and we know very little about the neurobiological basics of narcissism. So to start, I think we know very little about the neurobiological basis of any personality trait. And what we know is that it's not so easy. So there's not this one genetic variant or this one neurobiological mechanism that drives a personality trait. And also there are a couple of studies with narcissism, but the problem with these studies is that they are small sample sizes, non-replicated, very complicated 3-4-way interactions and so forth. So for now, I wouldn't bet too much on these results. So we need much more stable and robust results regarding this. I think cocaine is interesting in this regard because I think the dopaminergic system might be something that is relevant when it comes to narcissism. Because we know that drugs that pick up on the dopaminergic system, like cocaine, result in behaviors that we regard as narcissistic. The dopaminergic system is related to all kinds of approach behavior, to the valuation of new rewards. And this is something that is very typical for narcissists. So narcissists have this approach temperament, which is linked to the dopaminergic system.
So then they get a reward from the validation of others, or they get like a dopamine boost? Is that the idea, or?
Yes, and this is true for all of us. So but
theirs is larger somehow.
But there are differences in the strengths of this reactivity. And one idea, it's not tested yet, but one idea is that narcissists have a stronger reactivity with regard to this system. And social valuation, social attention is one of the strongest drugs we have in life, right? So this might be a biological link to understanding narcissism.
I think it's an interesting question to ask, the drug question that is, because it's quite clear that people don't lose their empathy when they're drunk, say, but they might not care.
Right.
So that's sort of the image that I have from reading sort of your work and looking into literature a little bit, that you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that really the capability is there. They can read other people, but they just value their own importance, let's say.
Yes, and all of us do this, right? So we have our goals in life, and we have all kinds of goals, but we are not able to realize all of them. We have a limited life energy, right? And I think that there's one important trade-off here. That is the trade-off between getting ahead and getting along. So getting personally ahead, reaching your own goals, and getting along with others, having intimate, close relationships, for example. And we all have these goals to a certain degree. There's almost nobody who has no interest in reaching one of these broad goals. But we have to make compromises. So if we put all our energy into getting ahead, then we will have fewer energy to deal with our social relationships, for example. But if we put all of our energy into getting along, then we won't have the energy to get personally ahead. And narcissists are special in a way because they put almost all the energy into the getting ahead goals. And this is why they have less energy to closely listen to others, although they can.
So it's almost, it sounds like it's more correct to call it a social strategy rather than a problem or a disease or something.
Right.
It's a personality trait.
Yeah, it's a social strategy, but not necessarily an explicit strategy. This easily sounds manipulative again, but it's just, the way individuals realize to get along with their life, right? And we all have these strategies, and narcissists have this rather extreme strategy, right?
So then an obvious question is, does the narcissist become successful, or does success build the narcissist?
Yeah. Again, there is few research really that can really answer these questions, because you need some kind of longitudinal research, right, to see, okay, what affects the other. What we know from the few studies that exist is that there are selection effects, so effects of narcissism on selecting into certain positions. So, for example, leadership positions and certain occupations like management, but also the media, for example. And this is because they like to be in these positions, because these positions reward them with attention, with social attention, and because they are able to get into these positions, because they act in a way that others think, okay, this is a leader, for example. But we have few evidence for socialization effect, so that being in these positions makes them a narcissist. So becoming a manager, being a manager does not necessarily increase narcissism levels. So it's rather selection effects and less socialization effects.
It's interesting because, like you said at the beginning, everyone says they don't like narcissists, but narcissists, I guess, are captivating. Right, and we can't stop watching, either because we want to watch them stuff up or make a mistake, or just because we think they're inherently interesting. What goes wrong, right? So, what is it that takes someone from that position where they're likable, affable, people want to speak with them, to where they don't want anything to do with them? It's like falling out of love almost, right? Yeah. So what goes wrong there?
And perhaps first, I think that what is special about narcissism is the energy power that is there. And energy power can lead to very positive and very negative results. There's this saying, I think, from Harari, who said that humans are species with the strongest power for both creation and destroyal. And in a way, you could say this about narcissists within the human species. So narcissists are the humans with the strongest potential for creating things and for destroying things. And I think there is a certain variation within the lives of narcissists and within their everyday lives, that they create positive things and destroy things on an everyday basis. But the big question here is, so for the life perspective of a narcissism, does it go in the positive direction or in the negative direction? And I think this has a lot to do with the kinds of strategies narcissists use to gain this social tension, this social status. And there's one default natural strategy that is being very expressive and charming. So self-presenting oneself, being self-enhancing. And this is in a way natural. If you think you are one of the greatest minds among humans, or the best-looking person ever, then the natural strategy is to show the world, right? The problem is that this is not always rewarded, right? So, and as soon as this is not rewarded, or there are competitors or critique, then the strategy no longer holds, right? And then narcissists use other strategies, and they use their elbows, they try to derogate others, they react aggressive to defend their aim for social status and grandiosity. And so in the long run, the question is, how often are narcissists relying on this more antagonistic, negative strategy? Because this strategy has negative consequences. It creates conflicts, it creates disapproval in the long run. So it doesn't create success for narcissists in the long run.
But is it changing today? Because I imagine if you go back a few hundred years ago, you were stuck in your little village surrounded by a few hundred people that knew you intimately. And so if you were aggressive and pushy and domineering over other people, then maybe that would work for a short time, but then you're stuck with 200 people who hate you. Whereas these days we have access to social media. We can move town. We can fly to an entirely different country. We can learn another language. We can express ourselves in this short-term game repeatedly, right? There seems to be more opportunity for the narcissist. Are we seeing this in today's society?
So did we see this strategy to leave social contexts and enter new social contexts because there are the rewards that narcissists really get?
You've burnt down the bridges already.
Right. Keith Campbell differentiates between the emergent zone and the enduring zone. The emergent zone is when you enter relationships, right? And in this emergent zone, narcissists have advantages for themselves, but also for others. Yeah, they create excitement, interesting situations, and they get the social approval they aim for. And then when it's about to maintaining social relationships in the enduring zone, they create more problems. And so, it's a certain strategy to leave these relationships as soon as problems arise and enter a new social context. When it comes to change in our society, I think the variation in narcissism we have, that doesn't really change. I think the variation in narcissism is always there and will always be there. What changes is, and this has to do with social media, for example, is that it's much more visible. Because narcissism aim for contexts in which they can have a lot of social contact, distribute their actions to get more social attention. Yeah, so social media is a tool for exactly that. They are better in creating attention, and they show more extreme behaviors. And this is rewarded by the algorithms of the social media apps because they want to make money. So therefore, narcissism is more visible. But this does not mean that we have more narcissists. And what we know from the science on the development of narcissism over generations, there is clearly no generational effect whatsoever. So we have the same number of narcissists, but a lot more talking about narcissists, right? And to understand why the higher visibility of narcissism doesn't have an effect on the occurrence of narcissism, I think one has to understand that narcissism is rewarded, but also punished in social media. So people are excited about narcissists, but once they make errors, then they punish them. So it's a zero-sum game for narcissists, right? It's a lot of up and downs. And so this does not lead to a higher advantage to being a narcissist in the long run.
But you sort of, okay, just to put some names out there are certain political figures, and right now in the news there are people like Andrew Tate and Elon Musk and I guess Amber Heard. There's a whole slew of people that get the narcissist label thrown at them. Yeah. It seems though to work. I mean, so Amber Heard is now out of the media. She's lost her career. So things seem to have gone really badly for her. But there are other people like Elon Musk who are very successful, and attention seems to puff them up no matter what, whether it's positive or negative. When you see these characters online and people are calling them narcissists, as a professional who works in the area, do you agree with the prognosis, or are people sort of missing the mark?
I'm fine with calling these individuals narcissists, because you have to understand that it's not about a disorder. So it's not about an official diagnosis and you have a disorder. Yeah? Then we would say, okay, this is nothing we just do from outside. But when it comes to judging the personality of others, it's just a question of how many valid cues do we have to this personality trait. And it's always probabilistic judgment, right? And for many of these celebrities, we have a lot of cues that are consistent over time, over situations. So we have much more evidence to call someone a narcissist as compared to having this person filling out a questionnaire, right? So we have real life information on the behaviors repeatedly across time.
Can I just ask quickly, does that mean in some sense you can be predictive? So by which I mean, okay, narcissists come out strong, they're exciting, they're invigorating, they're captivating, but then they might wear over time, let's say. Are you able to make predictions about, there'll be some political figure, they've really burst into the limelight, and then you know that, hey, I think that person's a narcissist and they're going to burn themselves out within a 5-year period or something like this. Do you make these predictions? Are you able to be directed in that sense?
Yeah, I would be hesitant to do this regularly for individuals. But of course, there are certain cues that make your predictions better, but it's still probabilistic. I think one important point is if you really also want to early on grasp these negative aspects, because this is what we always miss in the first place, right? Then you have to create situations in which narcissists express their negative parts. So you have to critique them. Create social stress that is status related in some form, yeah, and then you might be able to already early on get an impression about their more aggressive tendencies, for example.
So one aspect that I'd not understood very well and I'd sort of seen in my reading is that there are, as far as I understand, 2 types of narcissism. So there's this grandiose narcissism, but also a vulnerable narcissism. So what's the difference there, and what's going on? And I guess I'll remind you, if you forget this follow-up question, how does it split up in the genders?
Yeah. So for a long time, we differentiated between grandiose and vulnerable narcissism. And the idea here was that grandiose narcissism is the more easily observable, more outgoing aspect, and vulnerable is the more hidden, more neurotic aspect. meanwhile, it's a bit outdated, this differentiation, because there are different aspects that are entangled in these differentiations. So now we rather differentiate between 3 different dimensions. So grandiose narcissism entangles the agentic aspects, so the self-assured aspects, and the antagonistic ones. And vulnerable narcissism entangles the antagonistic and the neurotic ones. So it's so what we would do nowadays is differentiate between agentic, antagonistic, and neurotic aspects. And the agentic aspect would, what I said before, this default strategy of showing off, being charming, self-assured. This antagonistic would be the elbows. And the neurotic aspects, from my opinion, would rather be a sign of a failed narcissistic strategy. So it's not something that is built into narcissism and creates this need for compensatory behavior, but it's rather an effect. So narcissists that fail, that start to show more and more of these neurotic aspects.
What do you mean by that more exactly?
So for example, they still think that they are great and have deserved special treatment, but they realize, okay, the world will not see this. They start to give up on this, and they get more cynical about the social reactions and so forth. And this is what we particularly observe in people with a narcissistic personality disorder, and there we have this interesting neurotic aspect.
They shut themselves off from the world, or how does it present?
They yes in a way, and they talk about what they could have done or what they could reach if others would realize how good they are. Yeah, but they no longer really strive for it. And if they are in treatment, they also have a whole range of problems in their lives, because they won't enter treatment because they want to change their personality. So no narcissist enters psychotherapy and says, okay, can we change my narcissism? But they have problems with their spouse, with their job.
And that's when it's found.
Yeah.
So we don't know whether there's a genetic component, if I understand correctly. But what happens? Is that correct? We don't know whether there's a genetic component.
There is a genetic component for sure. Okay. So we don't know what genes are driving this.
You're more likely to have narcissistic children if you're a narcissist yourself?
Yes. So we have a couple of behavioral genetic studies on this, and like for almost all other personality traits, it's both genes and environment. And for narcissism, we have about 50% genetic component. So there's this clear genetic component and a very unclear environmental component.
It's funny. So I have a good friend who was I was speaking about this interview beforehand, and she was explaining to me that her mother is a narcissist. And one of the things that would happen with her when she was growing up is she would return home from school and her toys or her belongings would be given away. So her mother would collect things and give. She enjoyed giving other people's stuff away. It made her feel, appreciated, let's say. But my friend, I would say, is as far away from being a narcissist as anyone I know. So it sort of had the opposite effect on her, seemingly. So is there, in terms of the socialized component, what impact do you see, not genetically, but the impact of the social environment? What does that have on the children of?
So one of the main ideas is that it's the parents who drive the narcissism of their kids by their parenting behavior. And the most popular idea is that it's cold parenting, right? So cold parenting that creates this inner emptiness in children, and then they have to compensate for this and show their narcissistic behavior. And again, there's no evidence for this idea. There are very few studies that really looked into this, because again, you need longitudinal studies who follow up children and have assessments of the parenting behavior while they are parenting, not in retrospect. And the studies that exist that rather show an opposite effect of parenting. So an effect of overvaluation. So parents who always put their child on a pedestal, say that no one can sing so nice as you can. No one can build such a huge and nice Lego tower or whatever, right? This overvaluation that creates narcissism in the long term. So basically, it's social learning.
So if I wanted to have a raging narcissist as a child, you'd recommend over-evaluating their abilities.
Yeah, intensely.
Intensely.
Yes. But I think, so the even more important point about the development of narcissism is that parenting is not so important at all. So the effect of parents is much more via their genes. This has a clear effect, but parenting itself does not seem to have such a strong effect. We know this from behavioral genetic studies for other personality traits as well, that the shared environments in these siblings that are studied does not have a strong effect. So, for example, adoption childs are not more similar than any pairings of individuals. So the shared environments, including parenting and sociodemographic background, for example, do not seem to have such a strong effect. But we are basically only looking at parenting when talking about the development of narcissism. So my takeaway for this would be, okay, we need to look at other environmental sources here to better understand the development of narcissism. So, for example, kindergarten, school, peer groups, romantic relationships, occupational success, and so forth.
But so you mentioned you don't really have a lot of data in the longitudinal sense through the life. Right. But do you know, is it once a narcissist, always a narcissist, or how do people develop through their lives? Do you have any indication there?
Yeah, we just finished a meta-analysis on the few longitudinal studies we have, and we very clearly see that narcissism is a very stable trait. So the differences we see between individuals are stable across time. So the people who are narcissistic at age 20 tend to be the ones who are also narcissistic when they're 40 or 50.
They never get over it.
They can, but there's a large stability. I mean, these are correlations. So there's always a room for development, for increasing in narcissism or getting lower scores. But the differences between individuals in narcissism are pretty stable. There's a general trend across the ages towards a decrease in narcissism. So as people get older, they decrease in their narcissism, but the rank orders at each age are relatively stable.
And they may be better at employing the strategy, right? So it may not be as visible, even if they started off being a narcissist, they've realized, hey, this behavior doesn't pay off in the long run, and so I'm going to modulate my behavior.
Yeah, I mean, people create their niche over time. Right. Yeah.
We mentioned social media before, and one aspect of our culture today that I find fascinating are dating apps, right? So it's online dating, and I've noticed in my own personality something that I don't like so much, which is when I've tried these online dating apps, I find that the way I treat other people and the way I interact with the app depends very much on how much attention I'm getting, right? So it might be, if you're getting a lot of attention, then people somehow become cheaper. And so I have a related question, which is that in general, it's men that are pursuing women. And so is there any back reaction in terms of narcissism here in the population, just because you have two, let's say, classes of people who are behaving very differently? Is there anything that we can pull out and see that this gives rise to narcissistic behaviors in this group in this particular way, or has any work been done? And this is not an attack on any group.
Yeah. So what kind of groups do you mean? So the groups, perhaps you describe them.
So let me be more specific. Yeah. So if a person is being pursued by many people, does that person tend to develop narcissistic traits over time? Is this not
I mean, the dating and mating market has always been rough. And it always differentiated between people who are very attractive to many and those who are less attractive to many. So this idea that there's just a fit for everyone and there's the same probability for everyone, that's just not true. There huge differences in the mate value, so to say, of people. And with these dating apps, it's again just a question of how many people you can reach and how strongly you can create these differences and how visible they are via this app. I think this is the more important point. But the fact that people who are more attractive, more charming, expressive, more self-assured, that they attract more potential partners has always been the case, right? So this is, I think this is just more visible. And it's an interesting question whether this visibility and this kind of feedback you get, whether this has downstream consequences on the development of narcissistic traits. I'm not aware of any research that is done, but it would be a very interesting avenue.
It'd be a fascinating area to do research in, right? You have a ready population of people that are all using the apps anyway. You might have to contact...
Yeah.
But so culture-wide... If there are, let's say there are learned behaviors, could you end up with a whole culture of people who are narcissistic? So let me give you an example. We value individual liberty, let's say, in the West. So can it be said that across the culture, Western civilization is more narcissistic, or is this not? Does it make sense to?
Yeah, there are some differences between countries. So yes, the US is a bit more narcissistic than other countries, but these differences are not huge, and it's also very difficult to study this because within each context, people compare themselves with others from this context. So in measuring narcissism, it's sometimes difficult to measure the real differences between groups, because within a group you compare yourself to others and you give yourself perhaps a medium score because you realize, okay, there are others who are stronger in us. So it's a complex endeavor to measure these cultural differences. There are some signs that the US, for example, is more narcissistic, but there is narcissism in collective cultures as well. And I think one important point is that there are different arenas, playing fields to play out narcissism. And you can also play out narcissism by being the most helpful individual, the most selfless individual. So do you play on the getting along field to get ahead, right? So I think this is important to also see that's not just those who brag with their money, their jobs, or their attractiveness who are narcissists. There are a lot of narcissists who brag with their selflessness or even with their pity. It's also possible. I mean, people really have problems. They get devalued by others because of the group they belong to, but it's also possible for narcissists to somehow use these belonging to groups to brag with their pity or being discriminated and so forth.
It's an interesting question because one question that I'm sort of fascinated by is if you were able to do a personality test on, say, chief religious figures. So in many religions, you're supposed to be selfless. You're supposed to not puff up your own ego. So I'm thinking of people like the Dalai Lama or the Pope. Do you think, because you mentioned you can also be narcissistic in a giving sense. So you want to be seen as being very generous and very. Do you suspect that leaders like this would also show strong signs of narcissism, even though that's not a label we would generally attach to them?
Yes, I would expect higher narcissism values. I mean, what position is that, right? You can speak about and tell others about your wise ideas, your connection to God. You give away. You're clearly in a very superordinate position there. You get social feedback, attention. So this is a niche that is very well fitting to narcissistic needs. And I think the Dalai Lama has said something like, there's no smarter way to be egoistical than to be helpful and generous.
So, okay, let's talk about measurement, right? Because you can, of course, be very qualitative, but you're actually doing studies. So you're getting out. And let me first clarify something, because I have this. You have to get good statistics. And so I imagine these silly situations where you collect 300 narcissists together in a room just for the numbers. But that's obviously not what's going on, right? So I guess my first question is, how do you get enough people? How do you get narcissists for your research, or is that not how it's done? You study general populations. What does it look like?
Yeah, so we study general populations, and I get this question a lot. Yeah, where do you get your narcissists from? Because we have this idea that these are special individuals, a group of individuals. Either you are in this group or not. But if you study intelligence, you also would ask, okay, where do you get your intelligent people to study intelligence? Or if I would study the development of hate, for example, where do you get your big individuals from? So it's really this dimensional trait in the normal population, and we study variation. So what we need to assure is that we have enough variation, that we have people scoring high and low and, of course, in the middle. And what I observe is no matter where I look, no matter in what context, we have huge variation. So even the very conscientious and agreeable psychology students show a lot of variation, from very humble to very narcissistic. So this is no problem. So we see this variation, and what we do is to measure this variation in some kind and then look at, okay, what predicts this variation? What is this variation predicting, and with very different kind of designs.
So one thing that I would like to understand a little bit better is, so it sounds like narcissists present in very different ways. So as you said, there'll be someone who is very giving, then there's the narcissist that we all imagine who's very domineering. How do you actually in practice tease this apart? So to give a more specific question, what sort of questions would you ask me? What if you wanted to sit down with me and find out, is Shane a narcissist? Like how would you go about it? Where do you begin?
So I think it's important to really focus on the narcissistic core. So what do they believe? What do they strive for? And then this can have effects on behaviors, on outcomes in certain arenas, playing fields, but this is a separate point. So the first task is to really measure these three core characteristics: grandiosity, entitlement, and strive for status. And these are just plain and simple questions. So people agree more or less with something like, I have a great personality, I have deserved more than others, I like to be in the center of attention, right? And we get these scores, and of course these are self-reports, but it is about intrapersonal mechanisms, so there's no other way around. And we know from research that narcissists have pretty good self-insight. So
they know they're narcissists.
Yes. So in contrast to what many people think is that this is something like a hidden problem narcissists are not aware of. Narcissists know very well that they're narcissistic, and also how they come across with this behavior.
But they don't think it's a problem, because they genuinely think that I see, and so this is the reason why they would not go and seek help necessarily, or
I mean, people seek help when they have problems. And so narcissists would seek help when their life strategy fails. In the same way, other people seek help when their life strategy fails. So being a narcissist is not closer to, or does not necessitate to seek for help more than being shy or being overly orderly or something like that. It's just personality variation.
So can you give me an idea of what it would look like if I was to participate in one of your studies? So what sort of studies do you do? And I guess one thing that I'd like to know is whether you hide the purpose of the studies as well in order to get the result that you want.
Usually not. So generally, we have in our lab, we have a strong focus on being realistic and really trying to grasp what is really going on. And I think that's important because you can create really different results. As I said before, if you just ask people, for example, how would you like to get to know a narcissist better, you get completely different results compared to when you really have them interact with each other. So you really, I think in this kind of research, we really need to try to be as closely as possible to the phenomena you're interested in. And then there are different possibilities. So of course we are doing surveys and also longitudinal surveys if you're interested in development, panel studies. We're doing research in the lab where we have people interact with each other, diets like we are interacting, or groups of people who are interacting, with videotape behavior that is coded afterwards with systematic behavior coding. We have people evaluate each other after the interaction to learn more about interpersonal perceptions and evaluations. We have computer tasks where people get emotional or social stimuli and have to judge the emotions that are expressed to get at something like emotional accuracy, empathic accuracy. And we're doing research in the natural environment of participants themselves, mostly with smartphone-based studies. Mm-hmm. So either daily diaries that people respond to certain questions each day, and then we can look at the trajectories over time, the variation over time, or even multiple times per day via experience sampling designs where we ask for social interactions they had, how they felt, how they behaved, how their interaction partners behaved, and this multiple times per day. So we really get a closer idea about the everyday dynamics within people's lives.
But so what sort of question, it's completely out of field for me in terms of, I've never done any research that looks like this. And it seems like you have such a massive parameter space because everyone is different. You have all different participants. And I can imagine. So you mentioned you'll sit down at some computer and you'll have some interaction where you're looking for a particular behavior. But in general, how do you navigate that parameter space? I guess if I'm asking a more specific question, it's what are the questions you're trying to answer, and how do I link that to a particular study?
Yeah. So perhaps I give you two examples. One in the lab, when we're interested in how narcissists come across, for example, in dating, right? Mm-hmm. So we did a speed dating study in our lab. So when we invited singles, had them interact with 5 other singles they've met for the first time, videotaped them, asked them afterwards if they want to exchange contact information. If there's a match, we gave them the information. So then we measured narcissism of every individual, and we looked at certain flirting behaviors via the videotapes, and then had the ratings and the evaluations of their dating partners. And then we have 3 variables: narcissism, flirting, and their mate value, how many others were interested in them. And then we do some sort of mediation analysis where we look at, okay, narcissism affects flirting, flirting affects popularity during dating, and this is one explanation for why narcissists are chosen more during dating. And perhaps in the real life context, we are often interested in so more the emotional and motivational dynamics. So how do narcissists feel, and how do they respond to certain social situations? So we are then asking for their affects, so how well they're feeling, how proud they are, how much they are anxious or stressed or angry. So the emotion part, and then we are trying to craft the social situation part by how much they are being criticized, for example, valued by others. And then we can look at how often they feel positive or negative and how strongly the emotions are connected to certain social experiences. And what we see is, for example, that this connection between being valued regarding one's status and the emotions is stronger for narcissists. So within individuals, this dynamic is stronger.
Can you imagine meeting your significant other in a narcissism study? Like people ask, where did you guys meet?
Yes, I mean, this wouldn't be called a narcissism study because, there are all kind of other personality aspects involved. Sure.
So is there anything, what's the thing you've been most surprised by? You know, that result that came out where you sort of really didn't expect it?
So really the start of my narcissism studies was this effect that narcissism were liked more. Mm-hmm. And this is so dramatically different from how we think about this concept. That's really something that interested me. And it really shows that our just conceptual thinking about labels of such very complex constructs like psychological constructs is definitely not enough. So we really need to focus on specific situations and really look at behaviors. I think this is one of the main problems psychology has, the lack of behavioral studies and the importance of behaviors to explain how personality affects other individuals. And I was also, I also find interesting, how different narcissism can play out and how it can show in situations where you would think, okay, this has nothing to do with narcissism, like helping others, for example. And this is great work by Jochen Gebauer, who calls this communal narcissism. So being narcissistic in the communal field, So these are just a couple of things, but I think it's for me, narcissism is more like an example for many interesting dynamics we see with personality in general. So people are so dramatically different from each other, and this is fascinating because, as you said, why is that the case? We differ dramatically, and this has everyday effects on our relationships, on our occupational success, on our longevity, even. So
longevity.
Yeah, sure.
Do narcissists live longer or shorter?
I'm not aware of examined effects for narcissism, but we know that for other traits.
I guess a big component here of the research is the interaction between people. Right. So do narcissists tend to avoid other narcissists, or do they have groups of personality trait or people with groups of personality traits that they seek out? What do those interactions look like?
Yeah, we have these two ideas here. So the one idea is, okay, narcissists are searching for people who are low in narcissism because then they have individuals who can give them the applause they need. They are more subordinate, so they don't question the position of narcissists. So this is one idea. And often, for example, in a romantic relationship, it's combined with something like a victim hypothesis. So narcissists are searching for victims, right? So there's this other idea that narcissists are searching for other narcissists because only another narcissist is worth it, right? You can understand each other, you can shine on each other, and so forth. And there's some research on it, and it very clearly shows that not this compensatory idea again. So it's not how different they are, but rather a small similarity effect. Mm-hmm. So a small similarity effect in the sense that narcissists more often end up with other narcissists in relationships. But this effect is really very small. Mm-hmm. So the takeaway from me would be that you see narcissists in any combination, basically in all sorts of relationships. So there's not this one pattern you see.
But do you often see in relationships? So I imagine those relationships where there are two narcissists might be very fiery, right? What happens to a narcissist when their worldview of themselves gets challenged or broken down or even shown to not really exist? Do they put up walls and they're not able to accept it? Or is it explosive?
It's more explosive, so there's more conflict. So and so in relationship with two narcissists, you have this early shining. You have.
So maybe a deeply passionate relationship at the outset.
And you also a visible one. So we know from celebrities like Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, this combination very, very visible. But then problems arise and narcissists are not so good at handling problems within a relationship. And these problems with two narcissists are even stronger, explosive. And at some point, the relationship is burned down, right?
But I guess the worst situation would be if you had a narcissist together with someone who's really a pushover and just completely bends. That's the image that I have of these relationships, where there's someone who's really domineering and the other person just gets squashed. Is that something that you also see in the research?
Yes. So as I said, there are all kinds of combinations. So there's also this combination, but this is not the one combination, right? In this case, there might of course arise problems, and particularly if individuals are very submissive and not able to set the boundaries where they are needed, right? And then this relationship can be very unequal. Because narcissists tend to show more egoistic behaviors, they give less than they take, and so forth. I think it's important to not equal that with really problematic, toxic relationships and manipulative behavior. Gaslighting is a huge topic. They exist, these really toxic relationships, these really manipulative behaviors, but this is not the standard one ends up with a narcissist. But this has rather to do with other traits like psychopathy or...
Actually, can we touch on that a little bit? How does narcissistic personality disorder relate to psychopathy, for instance? Where do they overlap, and where is it? How do you distinguish the two, for instance?
Yeah. So where they're similar in is when they show when people show very aggressive, antagonistic behaviors, right? So, but the motivation is very different, right? For psychopathy, for example, the idea is that they really don't feel with others, right? But for something like sadism, people would say that they even enjoy seeing others being tortured or whatever, right? But this is not the motivational core for narcissists. So narcissists are interested in being admired, and they show aggressive behavior as a secondary strategy if this admiration doesn't work out. So, but it's not that they're interested in being aggressive, and it's not that they cannot understand the emotions of others, but they have other priorities.
It's kind of paradoxical, right? Because narcissists present themselves as being these big, or the classical sort of idea of it, these big people, but there's this deep fragility built in underlying it, where they really rely on the views of other people. It's odd, no?
But there is no deep fragility, I would say, right?
Okay.
When we look at the self-esteem or self-esteem fluctuations, that's typically how one looks at this fragility aspect. We see that narcissism have a higher self-esteem and a more stable self-esteem.
Mm-hmm. So it's mentally healthy in some sense.
Right. So if we apply the regular measures of narcissism and mental health measures, we see a positive correlation. Right. Again, it's important to differentiate between the different strategies and how much these strategies are applied by individuals in their lives. So narcissists who really create problems always have to use their elbows. They tend to, at some point, fluctuate more in their self-esteem, think they're special but no longer feel good. And there we see this dynamic. but it's not the starting point. It's not the fragility that creates narcissistic compensatory behavior, but it's an effect for individuals for which the default strategy to brag, show off, self-present doesn't work out.
So the idea that I have from what you said is that in psychopathy, they really don't have any feelings for the other person, zero empathy, and they just do the things they want to do. Whereas with narcissism, it's like their priorities are just set differently, let's say. And by that, it sounds like narcissists can still love other people. They still experience the full range of emotions. I guess that's the question. Can they experience love?
Yes, definitely. So we don't see any evidence that this is not the case. So we see, and narcissists are in relationships, they enjoy relationships. It's really just that often enough, they have other priorities and they don't show the relationship behaviors partners would wish for. And again, it's not that they don't show them, that they never show them, but they show them less often than others.
But so you touched on, we touched on mental health. So they're less depressed than the average population, you'd say. They're
Yes.
happier even.
Yes.
I see. But in the case where, so let's go back to the case where they feel that they've not been validated, that the world hasn't recognized their genius. In that case, do they fall into depression?
Right. Yes, sure. And that's also one of the symptoms we see when narcissists end up in therapy. Then for sure, if they've failed with their strategy, then they feel less good, more depressed, more fragile, and so forth. Like everyone who ends up in therapy, right? And I think this is also the reason for why we have this idea that narcissists are somehow fragile deep down inside. Because where we hear about narcissism is mostly from therapists talking about their individual experiences with narcissistic clients, right? But narcissistic clients are really a tiny portion of narcissists, namely those that failed and ended up in therapy.
So in our society, we also have sort of various victim narratives, right? We have stories about this group of people has been subjugated, and this group of people have been, the persecutors. What happens when a narcissist comes into contact with a victim narrative that's already sort of established? So by which I mean, what happens if there's a narcissist who believes they've been victimized personally, or that they belong to a group that's victimized personally? How does that play out?
I mean, so first, like any other individual who feels being victimized, it hopefully shows reaction that creates support by others, and that diminishes this victimization, because this is a real problem we have. And what we might observe is with narcissists that they create additional benefit.
They can prop up the movement.
Yes, but also for themselves. Mm-hmm. So, one idea could be that narcissists even help the movement because they're more active,
they're vocal,
create more attention, and therefore, create positive developments for this group because they're more active and they gather more and more positive reactions. Even if they might do this only for themselves, right? Because this creation of attention can give oneself status, right? So it can be the case that an individual who is victimized creates status by this being victimized, and nevertheless creates positive outcomes for the group as a whole. But it might also create negative outcomes. So if it
maybe long term,
in the long run, or if they only display this victimization, but use this group as a group to
drive themselves forward.
Drive themselves, and this can have backlash effects, right?
on the entire group. Yeah. But so if you find yourself in a relationship with someone you suspect of being a narcissist, how can you mediate the situation? How should you interact with someone you suspect of being a narcissist in order to, say, cool tensions? Or
I think the first important point is really self-reflection, because a relationship is always a relationship between at least two individuals. And so I think one has to ask oneself, what do I like in partners, both when I get to know them and when I'm in a relationship? What do I need in a relationship? What is a no-go in a relationship? How much excitement or security do I want? How much closeness or autonomy do I want in a relationship? And this is something that's very important to have a clear idea about one's own preferences. And then it's clear that so the combination excitement and some autonomy is a better combination for being with a narcissist than security and very close preferences. And then there are, of course, some tips one could give. So I think one important point is to enjoy the excitement narcissists can bring into a relationship together, but then also have room for oneself to enjoy life on your own, besides being in this relationship, and give the narcissist the space he or she needs with this also. The second is to be, in a way, fair to oneself and the narcissist. So to realize that you are in a relationship with someone with a certain personality, and this has benefits. Obviously, you are in this relationship for certain reasons. And often these reasons also have to do with narcissism, because someone is very self-assured, very dominant, speaks up, and not trying to really change this individual, making someone else out of this person. There's something, this idea that is tied to this disorder idea, that someone is disordered and traumatized, and in a relationship I can heal this person, right? And this is not needed. You can just deal with this other person as with any other person, as a human being. And narcissists are responsible for their behavior. And also for the negative consequences of their status drive. And so you have to just have normal expectations towards communication and being together in a relationship. And the third point is, I think, really being able to draw boundaries where they're needed, right? And to do this in a rather calm way. So not to heat up the conflict yourself, but rather wait, it will be over, and then make very clear statements about boundaries. And this is difficult because stating boundaries can always be seen as critique, and narcissists react more negatively when they're criticized. So it's important to do this in a communicatively clever way. To start by emphasizing the value of this relationship, stating that if you say I'm dumb, then I feel you're not valuing this relationship. I cannot accept this, and expect that you apologize. If you do so, we can get rid of this and focus on more enjoyable, interesting things, right?
But so what's the boundary then between some... Because, of course, there are people that just are very self-confident and they have a very healthy self-esteem. What's the boundary where this becomes really a disorder? I know it's a personality trait, but what is a disorder? Where do I get to that point? Where would you say?
So it creates a disorder. If you fail with this strategy, and that
but before that, it's not. It's a survival strategy that can go wrong, and then
right. It's a personality trait. So, and if you are very shy. You can live your whole life being shy without having a disorder. Yes, but if in your life context, with your other characteristics you have, your shyness creates problems that are very strong. Then you might end up in a dependent personality disorder or whatever, right? And the same as with narcissism. Narcissism is a personality trait. It doesn't have anything to do with a disorder in the first place. But if it creates problems and people fail with the strategy in their lives, then it can become a disorder.
I guess what I want to understand is, this is something that in general I don't really understand. So you have people who have, say, ADHD or someone who's depressed, or there are various conditions, let's say, that people can have, and at some point they medicate. So where does that breakdown happen? I know we could say that, it's when when the strategy is not working or when it's being destructive in their life. But, we have the surrounding environment. We live in a world that we didn't necessarily evolve for. And so how do you make that decision of, this is something where we really should be working on the external, and no, this is something where they really should be medicated? Like, where does that, I know you are primarily a researcher, but where does that breakdown happen, and where do we make that decision?
I mean, if people are no longer realizing a satisfying life for them and don't have a strategy on their own, then they end up seeking for help. And I don't think medication would be the first thing they should get, but really a psychotherapeutic treatment. And there the focus is on the problems people have. The focus is not on, okay, let's change your personality, but focus on the problems people have, and thereby creating a more flexible, a more positive way of interacting with others. So because narcissists who end up in therapy are often those who are very rigid in their strategies. And so they create problems with their partner, in the job. And in therapy, you kind of have a safe space where you can try out alternative strategies. Yeah, they can learn that, okay, by listening to others, by giving worth to the emotions and desires of others, you can be more effective in your everyday interactions. And you can even reach your own goals. And they can be egoistic better if you engage with others in this more communal way. And then the therapist would typically also work with these critical situations. So when narcissists are criticized, to really show them what they do in these situations, to show them what social effect this has on others. And this is something these narcissists often do not have the chance to train in their everyday life, because they are too fast in reacting to this.
They're too fiery in response, and so they never actually have the self-reflecting loop that would repair the reason why I'm interested in this is because earlier on we talked about cocaine and alcohol and sort of these drugs that make you appear more narcissistic perhaps, or have narcissistic tendencies. And one of the things I wondered was along the lines of, is there sort of an anti-cocaine or something like this? But the downside, it sounds like it's something that would be very difficult to medicate for, because people who are narcissistic, it sounds like, they have this vigor and this energy and all these positive aspects to their personality. And it seems like something that would be very difficult with a chemical to tease that out and like leave the positive aspects. And it's a personality, so you'd be altering your own personality quite drastically.
Yes, and you would get rid of all the positive aspects. So people enter life and develop in their lives with their personality. They develop their strategy that works for them in some way. And some of them, for some of them, the strategy doesn't work out like they wish for, and the solution is almost never to get rid of this personality, right? But to find better ways of expressing this personality so that they can create less problems and get more of what they're seeking for. And also to be more flexible in what you're seeking for. So one problem with narcissists is that they put everything on the getting ahead side, right? And one thing they could also learn in therapy. So I'm only talking about those with a already a disorder, failed narcissists. What they could learn is that there are other things in life that are enjoyable too, including close interaction with others, listening to others, and so forth. And this creates more balance in an otherwise very risky life strategy.
So in terms of misconceptions, this idea that we have that narcissists are the bad guys, this doesn't hold up in your view?
No, I think it's more accurate to say narcissists are those with a lot of energy and power, which they have because they very strongly strive for social attention and status, which is a very intensive drug. And this power creates effects, both positive and negative ones. And this is why we are talking so much about narcissists. And this has a reason that we're talking about narcissists. This has a reality because they create effects in reality, both negative and positive ones. So it's not about the bad guys or the good guys, but very powerful guys. And it's interesting to see when, who, and in which contexts we can perhaps profit from these positive effects and less of these negative effects.
So you wouldn't be insulted if someone called you a narcissist. This is not an insult in.
Yeah, I think the problem with this insulting is that as soon as we understand it as a disorder, it's automatically an insult, right? Because people are not in life order or whatever. But as soon as it's a personality trait, the question is just, is it accurate that you call me a narcissist or an extrovert or being shy or anxious or depressed, right? You can be right or wrong with this judgment, but it's not an insult. And I think for me, we don't use this word too often. We use it in a wrong way.
So I want to move towards the end of the conversation, and there's a few questions I am curious about moving forwards. So the first is, what do you wish you understood? So what is the thing that has been nagging at you as a research question that you wish you understood about narcissists that's just not clear to you at the moment?
I think it's really this developmental part. So we really know far too less about how narcissism develops over time. We know it's stable, we know there are these age trends, but what are the precursors of individual narcissistic development? Yeah, we have few ideas about this parenting effects, not so strong. Perhaps other environments, genes, but what genes? Nobody knows. What is the combination of genetic effects and environmental effects, and how does this play out in a developmental trajectory of individuals in what life context? So I think I would really love to learn more about this development of narcissism. I think this is the first one, and the second one is really to understand more about narcissism in a broader, more collective context. So we talk about a lot about narcissistic politicians and leaders, but we know very little about the context in which they might help to reach innovation, change, and in which context they really create problems we wouldn't want to have.
So obviously you're successful in getting grants and this sort of thing for your research. When you write those grants and you are talking about the outcomes, the benefits of the research, what is that? So what do you sell as the story for the big image?
So luckily in Germany with the grants, we're still focused on research, basic research. So you don't necessarily need this idea for the
but you have a
public
book,
outcome. I have a book, so there is relevance. So I think it's really important to see that narcissism has these effects. every day on people's relationships, on the job market, on economy, even on politics. It makes a difference whether that Trump is a narcissist, makes a difference. Because he's a narcissist, he was able to create this attention and to use pre-existing intergroup conflicts for his own benefit. So this has real effects, and we need to understand how this works, how people react to narcissists, to really build up on this, and also create interventions on whatever scale for individuals, for groups, or for societies.
Are you impressed at what Trump was able to achieve in this? I mean, he became the president. That's very impressive. But I mean, there's some sort of special sauce that these people have where they can really connect into. At the moment, something that I'm fascinated by is that there are people who will, accurately or not, but they will be able to identify a problem. Society has this issue, or there's this happening, and I'm the solution to it. Right? This is something that seems to be happening with increasing regularity now, and I find it very impressive that people are able to act as this lightning rod. In your own research studying narcissism, have you been impressed with the abilities that sort of there?
Yes, and I think it has to do with a fine sense of the attention market. Mm-hmm. So a fine sense of what creates attention, of what people are paying attention to. And because narcissists are so eager to get this attention, they're using more of their energy to learn what people are attending to. And I think this is something that also happens in politics. Yeah.
So my background's in physics, and anyone who's done an undergrad in physics will notice that the researchers sell the lore, right? The LORE, not the, where they will tell you about famous physicists and their lives. And it's very enjoyable learning about the history as you learn about the actual academic side of things, the analytical side of things. And often we learn how something was discovered rather than how we understand it today, right? So the story of how these inventions came about is very important. And so it's sort of a very ego-driven, it seems, field of research, and there are a lot of big egos that in physics. Do you think, in general, a little bit of narcissism is sort of required to get ahead, even in research in areas where?
Sure. So, I mean, this self-confidence and agentic approach to reaching one's goals has an effect in almost any occupational context, and also in science. And in science, we have also have an attention market, and we also have rewards that are socially defined, like how many people are in your lab, how many papers do you have, what is your H-score, and so forth and so forth. There are all of these tiny
dopamine hits,
dopamine status cues. So for sure, this is also a context in which narcissists can strive.
This is a question from earlier in the conversation. It got dropped along the line, so I'll jump back into this. But so is there a breakup in terms of so a few different status groups? So how does narcissism in a person who is, let's say, of low social status compared to someone who's of high social status? How does it present? I know you touched on a little bit that people feel that the world has not understood them. So I wanted to ask two questions together, because they're sort of intertwined, and also just the gender split as well.
So regarding status, it's important to differentiate between social status and something like socio-demographic status or formal status. For social status, we see that narcissists often end up in jobs that that have a higher social status, like management, for example. For formal status, we don't see big differences. So you have the whole range of narcissism in people with high or low education or income. There's a slight effect towards higher narcissism with higher education, but these are relatively small effects. And the same is true for gender. So it's interesting because if you think about narcissists and try to name some individuals, most people come up with men. So mostly men. But what we see empirically is that the average scores of men and women and other genders are relatively similar. There's a small gap in the sense that men have higher scores, but the difference is really small and much smaller than we typically think it is. So, like with other personality characteristics, gender differences tell very little of the story. So if we know a gender of someone, we know little about his or her narcissism. And within each gender, we see the whole variety of scores. There's some ideas about not the strength of narcissism itself, but the way it plays out. And there we see some indication that and these are very stereotypical, these findings, so that for men play out their narcissism more often in the occupational context, and women more in this humble and helping context, and also with regard to beauty, appearance. But again, also these different arenas in which they are played out, these effects are very small. So you see men that brag with their appearance, and you see very powerful women bragging with their job. But they are small effects. And the other one is the strategies that are used and how visibly they are used. So for men, we see more open aggressive behavior, and for women, more subtle aggressive behavior. But again, this is something we generally see as a gender difference, is that the aggressiveness of women is more subtle than that of men.
It's interesting because for this interview, I was trying to think of people. So, and on the female side, I had Meghan Markle, Amber Heard, and Mother Teresa were the three examples I was calling to mind. But then on the male side, there was an endless list. And I guess the interesting thing that I found was, so again, talking about Elon Musk, there is a huge population that loves him, right? And I think Andrew Tate is an equivalent sort of, in terms of this, is someone where there's people who really love him, and then there's other people who just absolutely want nothing to do with him. And the group of people who want nothing to do with them really like to see them stuff up, right? It's enjoyable to see these people fall and make mistakes, and people will focus on Trump being obsessed with his hands or whatever it is, that his hair blowing in the wind or toilet paper on his shoe. People will focus on the fact that they think that Musk is killing Twitter. And the thing that they point out that I've seen sort of consistently is people like to point out narcissists doing stupid things. And so this was something I was a little bit confused by, that you said at the beginning, that we don't see a difference in intelligence, and necessarily you can find narcissists that are everywhere from Einstein, I'm not calling him a narcissist, but everywhere from the most intelligent to the stupidest. And so I shouldn't be surprised actually to find narcissists that are doing silly things, right?
Yes, and of course the risky strategy they use creates an opportunity for both very innovative effects, but also very stupid ones if they don't work. So that's the point about innovation and change, that it can go wrong. And I think it's interesting to think about it from a collective perspective. that we kind of need this innovative effects, even if they go wrong, and then we lose a narcissist, right? Because he went wrong and did silly things, and nobody wants to hear about this person any longer. But we need these changes and these trying out as a society what is possible, what not. And I think there's a clear role for narcissists because they do so, even if others say that's bullshit, that will not work.
Right, and something I hadn't thought about is the fact that a narcissist is probably more likely to venture into a territory they have no expertise in, and confidently state that they know the answer and that that's the solution.
And this is the point where, of course, other characteristics make a difference. Because if you have two individuals, both highly narcissistic, and one is highly intelligent and the other not, they will create very different ideas, right?
By what do you mean exactly?
So the one idea has a higher chance of
being successful,
right. Being really innovative, that can work, and the other one being much more probable of creating something that sounds interesting but is not thought through, right? And so it's really important that it's not just narcissism, but it's narcissism combined with certain abilities people have and certain contexts. We have context both in the economy, but also in the society as a whole, where we need more change, where we need rapid change. And we have other contexts where we just had a shift and now need stabilization, for example. And we know that narcissists can have more positive effects in these contexts where we need sudden changes and less positive when it's about stabilizing an organization, for example.
Does that mean there's a political split also with narcissists being narcissists more progressive or?
Now we saw regarding political attitudes, we see narcissism in every party. So there's not a huge difference, but within each political narrative, they would go for the more drastic, more
out there,
more risky ideas. So these different political narratives are more like different playing fields where narcissists can play out their narcissism.
Do they gamble more in general?
I don't have numbers for this, but I know that there are specialized treatments for gambling disorders, and there's often a connection with narcissism, and it makes sense.
They believe they're going to roll the dice well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know this is a game that's about luck, but not with me, my friend.
I find the whole area really fascinating. It's been brilliant having you on the podcast. Thank you very much for coming along, Mitja. Welcome back anytime.
Thank you.